Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning is one of the most complex games I've ever played, and I don't mean mechanically, narratively, or visually, but as an artistic whole. In essence, it was an attempt to reboot Spyro as a dark fantasy epic, the first entry in a trilogy. It follows Spyro, a young purple dragon separated from his people and raised among insects, who one day learns of his true origin and so embarks on a grand quest of self-discovery. It's a tale as old as time, but the beauty is always in the telling, and A New Beginning is quite the wonderful journey. From the humbling beginnings at the orange-tinted, murky outset of Dragonfly Swamp, to the decrepit Dragon Temple, to the vertigo-inducing tall plains, to the icy tomb of wars long past, to the overwhelming intensity of a volcano's wrath, and finally, Cinder's villainous cloud-bursting spire. The visual language is in near-perfect harmony with the narrative flow. You start out in sleepy bumpkin nowhere, progress through ancient catacombs, brave the elements in stunning intimacy, and at last plunge into the heart of darkness. So much of this game is upheld by its audio-visual design. There are some set pieces here that will stick with me forever. The usage of dynamic lighting, framing, and explosive effects is all impressive on its own, but in symbolic conjunction with Spyro's journey, it becomes awe-inspiring, at least to me. Speaking of Spyro, his character is central to the experience. He is the game's core. He longs to know who he is, why he was born, and in his case, it's as fantastical an answer as anyone could hope for. He's destined for world-shattering greatness. He has a majestic culture with powerful ancestors to reflect upon, and his very will shapes the course of reality, if only he embraces it. This is not a story about finding strength so much as unlocking that glorious heroism already buried within. There are some legitimately powerful scenes about finding the you within yourself, forgetting the past, and embracing your innate beauty. Let go. Don't think. Don't feel. Just be.
Just forget everything you ever thought you knew. Forget yourself. Only through forgetting will you remember what your ancient blood already knows. You can fly.
Even though this game is all about Spyro, his journey, and who he is, there's a menagerie of supporting characters. To say they're of varying quality would be quite the understatement. Sparx, Spyro's dragonfly buddy, has been with him since birth, for example. They're like brothers, and he's supposed to be a piece of Spyro's home, something he carries with him everywhere, the everyman voice of sanity in an over-the-top fantasy narrative. Unfortunately, most of the time he's just really obnoxious. Thematically, his purpose is quite clear, but it doesn't justify the sheer script-stealing shenaniganry he gets up to, and none of his exasperated quips add anything to the narrative. That said, the story would ultimately be worse without him. In a world which takes itself as seriously as Legend of Spyro, it's useful to have Sparx for contrast, even if he should be written better. The rest of the characters are all distinctive and likable, if simplistic, and the implications of their history let the audience fill in the gaps. The strongest cast member is Ignitus, a once proud warrior who teaches Spyro the way of the dragon. When you first meet him, he's distraught, tired, aching, and you can feel the hopelessness in his movements, his voice, his entire person. Until Spyro reignites hope in him, and he becomes an invaluable companion and mentor. Ignitus, alongside the other few surviving dragons, are guiding forces in Spyro's life, but they're far from absolute authorities, and that's because self-motivated exploration is central to not only A New Beginning's themes, but its gameplay. That might seem a bit odd, given this is a strictly linear 3D platformer with heavy focus on action, but hear me out. As you progress through the game and discover its enchanting fantasy locales, you'll gradually unlock new powers. Your mentors will give you some superficial tips on how these are used, but experimenting is up to you, and experiment you must if you want to use them for anything substantial. A New Beginning's combat system has startling depth, but only if you're willing to find it. On the surface level, your fire powers are forged from pure aggression, primarily centered around disruption and direct damage. You can lay out a few firebombs to scatter a crowd and knock over bigger enemies, then lay down some melee in the confusion or corner them with sustained flame breath. It's a great go-to utility for offense, even if it's not the most versatile. The electricity powers are useful for enemy control, in the sense that they allow you to literally control your enemy. You can flick the stick to move them however you like, and this power set by far has the most potential for stun locking. It makes for a good panic button if you need that sort of thing, even if its alt fire is way too erratic. Then, my personal favorite, the ice powers are highly technical. They imbue the largest variety of effects and interact with enemies in the most interesting ways. You might figure they just freeze foes or something, but that comes in so many different varieties. Ice Breath turns the smallest enemies into snowballs instantly, completely ending their threat and allowing you to punt them into spikes, lava pits, or off ledges. This effectively renders all minor mooks harmless, and it's a massive boon in crowded combat. The ice also completely stalls larger enemies, allowing you to get in a good melee combo free of charge. And finally, the alt fire unleashes a stream of bullets, which slow your foes and provide the most direct firing line. Ice powers have so much versatility, and they're just cool, pun intended. Lastly, the earth powers are for bullying. They're about asserting your dominance in the combat space. When fully upgraded, the earth shot can be used to just knock anyone around anytime. All the enemies feel like toys under the insistent might of your ground-shattering roar. And to boot, it's a serious damage dealer. Laying down rapid-fire earth shots absolutely melts an enemy's health bar, especially bosses. Even the final confrontation is trivial if you spam earth shot. That was just a rough overview of the basic utilities I found while playing, but suffice to say, giving the player so many options has its strengths and weaknesses. If you care to explore the mechanics, you'll be rewarded for your creativity, but if you don't, the game will quickly devolve into a button-mashing slog. It doesn't help that the first levels are easily the most tiring, since your moveset is so limited. Oh yeah, and I guess this is a platformer too. The platforming in The New Beginning is, well, serviceable. There are unfortunately only a couple times they use the glide mechanic for anything meaningful. The pathfinding is hit or miss, ranging from dead obvious to surprisingly brilliant, and most of the puzzles boil down to flipping a sequence of switches. Basically, platforming adds variety, and it's welcome enough, but the combat is the real star. And I'd love to wrap it up here with a nice bow, but things aren't so simple. For every positive I've mentioned, there are as many downsides. In spite of the variety in combat options, the enemies are surprisingly moronic, and the combat encounters swivel rapidly between brain dead and shockingly challenging. The levels, massive and impressive as they are, can seriously wear out their welcome through repetition. The game tries desperately to make each combat encounter unique, but that only matters if you're already actively thinking about your playstyle. To most players, the various arenas will look identical. Unfortunately, the narrative and presentation have just as many, if not more, issues. The facial animations are impressive for the hardware, but often come across as stiff and uncanny. The sweeping music is gorgeous to the ears, but can often be overbearing. And way too much is left up to implication. A New Beginning has immaculate atmosphere and vibes, but is dreadfully inadequate at nuanced storytelling. All that said, I really adore this game. I honestly can't think of a similar experience in the medium anywhere. The Legend of Spyro: A New Beginning is unique, atmospheric, enchanting, and all around beautiful. My adoration for fantasy makes bias inevitable, but no one expects poets to be unbiased to begin with, and this title is well deserving any poetry I can provide.